So I titled it Wild Flora in Your Backyard because I wasn't 100% sure what direction I was going to take with this. If I would talk a little bit more about some of the wild areas in your backyard as well as just gardening with native plants. But I think the focus will be a lot on native plant gardening, and I threw some slides in at the end. If we have time, we can talk about that as well. Um, yeah, so welcome. Bob did mention that a lot of members, or some members anyways, were quite interested in native plant gardening. So I thought that, it might be a little funny to be talking about gardening in the middle of winter right now. And also, when so many of our wild places are sort of under threat at the moment. It might be funny to talk about gardening, but of course, they're not completely unrelated topics. So, and I think a lot of gardeners are sort of interested in using native plants in their gardens, precisely because they're more aware of some of the bigger threats at a landscape level to biodiversity and wildlife protection. And they don't want to sort of contribute to that even in a backyard setting. Um, so I've been thinking about native plant gardening for some years. During my post-secondary studies, I was mentored by someone named Larry Lamb, who was quite involved in some of the environmentally sensitive areas in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. Um, and he was really did a lot of work on native prairie restoration projects. So designing gardens with native plants. And he was very adamant on only using plants that would have historically been found in those areas. So in a very localized area. And not just the plant species, but also the plant material, the actual plants and the seed sources should be sourced from as close or as accurate of a location as possible to where you are planting them, even if it's just for a backyard garden. Um, so he ended up doing a lot of plant rescues. So often he would get a call. Someone would say, we're going to be digging, or would you like to come dig up some of these plants before we sort of pave them over to put in a parking lot or something? And so it was pretty amazing work. But often, you sort of start wondering, what's, what if you just didn't pave them over and pave over the woodlot in the first place? But that was where he sourced some of his native plants for some of these landscape projects. This was one project that I worked on. It was around a tool and die manufacturing or like a building. So you can see the building a little bit in the background there, the Tibida in the foreground. So most of the maintenance for that garden involved just keeping those plants away from the pathways and taking things out, the sort of the non-native undesirable plants like oxeye daisies and Queen Anne's lace and Hesperus metronalis, Dam's rocket. Um, but then occasionally, because it was a prairie type garden, we did do these prescribed burns. So this is just another view of the front of the building. Um, and that's sort of the after effect where you can see that's Verbena stricta, I think, in the foreground. There's rattlesnake master on the right there by the Ratibida. And in the background, there's some showy tick trefoil, Desmodium canadense. And I think that's Monarda fistulosa by the verbena there. So, anyways, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because a little bit about my background, but then also just to sort of note that, native plants can be used in lots of different type landscaping work, whether it's restoration projects, remediation, or maybe a backyard garden, and maybe you could be using them because you want a more drought-resistant garden, or maybe you're using them because you want plants that will help you with excess water. But of course, not all of those cases do not necessarily need to use exclusively native plants. But one could. So I haven't really been involved in restoration work for the last since let's say, so 15 years. So since working at the gardens, my focus has been more on just incorporating native plants into a garden setting, in an ornamental garden setting. But I was really excited to see, I don't know how many of you on the Zoom call were at the field trip this last year that Allison McNeil was showing us her work using Iva frutescens um, for wetland restoration, sort of. And I was really, really excited and impressed by that. And I actually went back twice to see Iva again because I thought it was such a cool plant that I'd never known anything about. I'd spent a lot of time on the dykelands around Annapolis Royal, and that's not a plant that we have here. So, this was about 40 years ago. There was already sort of a bit of a trend in gardening to sort of get away from the manicured look of the fussy, high maintenance gardens, and towards a more unfettered, dynamic, natural plant system. So that was about 40 years ago. So if you think about that timeline, um, the Annapolis Royal Historic Gardens, that is about 45 years old now. But at the time when the Historic Gardens was sort of the idea for a botanical garden came about, people were really excited, really knowledgeable and excited about the colonial history in this area. Battles between the French and the English, and that was a lot of the focus. And so the garden design sort of came out of that. So there's the Acadian garden, there's an extensive rose collection that's based on the development of the rose over time, the Victorian garden, the governor's garden, and so forth. And then interspersed are these different plant collections. Um, so it wasn't really until about 15-ish years ago that there was the thought to include gardens that showcase specifically native plants. And so those are the two areas in the gardens, the pine forest, which may be renamed soon, and the native plant garden on the lower paths. So the more formal gardens are up above, and then as you move down towards the dykelands, you move toward in a less formal garden beds into the sort of transition zone there. So a few years ago, oh, I should say, I'm sure most of you on this Zoom call thing here have uh, some idea of what I mean when I'm talking about a native plant, but I just thought I'd just clarify that a little bit. So I'm talking about, the plants that have evolved since the glacial period, so about 10,000 years ago. And the interesting thing about that time period for me is that, Nova Scotia, of course, has a long history of plant introductions, the last 500 years of settlement from Europeans. But the history of native plants here, all those plants that were here before that time, that sort of aligns also with the history of people here in Mi'kma'ki. So for thousands of years, Mi'kmaq people were living with and using the plants around them. And so if we sort of stretch our idea of gardening a little bit, we could, in a sense, say that, Mi'kmaq folks were the first gardeners here. So a few years ago, we started getting a lot more interest from garden clubs to talk about native plants. And so the former horticulturalist Karen Achenbach and I did a presentation to one of the garden clubs, and we started putting together a list. And we sort of thought that most of our native plants would be in those areas. But when we actually started looking at it, we noticed that actually we have a lot of native plants all throughout the gardens. And some of those were planted right at the beginning. So some of those plants, Pearly Everlasting, it's one that we have growing up between the flagstone was not actually planted. It's sort of volunteered. We have planted it since in the native plant garden, but for many years it was just growing between rocks in the courtyard as you walked in, just sort of helping itself. This is another one I quite like sessile leaf bellwort. So the uvularias are there's another one that's not native to Nova Scotia, a more upright, larger one, and we do have both at the gardens. But this one is a great ground cover, and it was planted really early on in the gardens, and it likes shade, and yeah, it spreads quite well. Um, so just to mention a few of the ferns, so these are all just plants that exist outside of the native plant garden too. So of course, ferns are great for ornamental gardening. Just really pair well, and a lot of them are very shade tolerant, so can be used in lots of different situations. Oh, and I did put a little asterisk there. Would not recommend for small gardens. Um, Hay-scented fern for sure. Do not plant it if you want something to behave. But we have managed to successfully dig it out and make room for other plants after it was taking over an entire area of the gardens. Um, Two that might surprise you. We do have Western and Eastern skunk cabbage. Of course, they're different genuses, but and growing near our ponds and pickerel weed in our ponds, of course. Lots of different shrubs. I'll show a list later of shrubs and trees and a number of things, but I won't talk a lot about trees because I feel like, um, yeah, it's sort of a given that we have about one of each or more. So these are some of the yeah, native shrubs that we have in various places throughout the gardens. The Dervilla was really interesting because that we actually planted that, or sorry, the previous horticulturist many, many years ago planted that as part of the design for where the entranceway to the Acadian garden. There's irises and there's the honeysuckle there, bush honeysuckle, and that's meant to sort of show that French presence. Um, because of course it was named after Sierra Derville there. Yeah. Some other ones, the bone set has actually just volunteered itself in the gardens, around some of our ponds. Not sure where that came from. The turtle head we've had in our perennial beds, and also the pink form of that one as well, or pink cultivar. And some other lovely ground covers. Of course, we also have the non-native lily of the valley, um, which is very invasive, and we often have people who want to who come to us ask if they can have a piece of it, and I prefer that they didn't. But the wild lily of the valley, or the Canada Mayflower, is actually, I would say, just as nice for a shade ground cover. And the partridge berry, that picture is actually not taken at the gardens, but I put it in because I took it last year at one of our local parks, and I just thought it was neat to have the flowers and the like all the flowers, the berry, and the flower buds all in one photo there. And these are a couple other ones that might surprise you. Trichostemma blue curls has actually just been think it's ranked as an S1 now. It's just been listed as it's only found I think in one lake, around one lake in Nova Scotia. But it's one that I had started from seed some years ago, and it kind of did fizzle out because it isn't annual. So you have to put it in the right place so that it will self-seed. But sometimes we also have the issue where people don't necessarily know all the plants, and if they're not labeled, then sometimes maybe they get weeded out. And then the yellow part of the one there is the Zizia aurea, and that's actually listed as an S2 in Nova Scotia. So that, but it's quite common in Ontario. And grows really well from seed. Although some people sort of say it looks a little bit like goutweed. So just careful with that. And then some other volunteer native plants, things that have just sort of come about. We have a lot of bayberry that predates the gardens, but I think it's a lovely addition. Um, we have Pilea pumila, like the clearweed. I don't know if anyone knows of this plant, but I should also mention you should feel free to interrupt me or say anything because I have no idea who I'm talking to or if there's if there's any burning comments people want to make, go ahead. So the clearweed actually pops up in our barnyard, in our compost, and pretty well everywhere. And I didn't really realize that it was such a that I think I forget if it's an S3 or S4, but it's not terribly common.
That's right.
And then the Lobelia inflata as well pops up sort of as a weed around our gardens. Um, and of course the jewelweed as well. And we've had a starflower, it's now called Lysimachia borealis. Um, and that one and the Herb Robert also just have volunteered themselves. And so not things that we've planted. And these two might also surprise you. We've had two parasitic plants pop up unexpectedly in the gardens. The one on the right is has grown up under our mugo pines for whatever reason. So we've since actually mulched that bed, and it doesn't seem to be coming up anymore. And then the cancer root, that one was sort of fun to notice growing up. It was actually under some Ilex glabra. So of course these aren't things that you're going to be planting, but they're just sort of interesting to share some things that have appeared. And I threw that slide in just to remind us about some of the other parasitic plants. These are all found nearby the gardens, but I don't expect to ever find them in the gardens. And then some spring ephemerals, two of my favorite, twin leaf, and of course the red trillium. We also have a number of non-native trilliums. I don't know if I put a slide in about it. No. And then, if some of you have been to the gardens before and noticed this, but we have the double bloodroot. So it's it- so this is a cultivar of the bloodroot, but it does not produce seed. It's it's not terribly useful to insects. So it's purely an ornamental plant. As you can see in the center there, there's no flowering part
Right.
there. It's just petals. And that's just another view of what it looks like. So when you're planting native plants, yeah, just be aware of what your purpose is in planting that. If you're trying to have some sort of ecosystem benefit, maybe not the best, but it is is a neat little plant. And then some other ones that we have that are sort of native to other parts of Canada. Uh, the May apples are lovely shade, very thuggish, will spread over time. And we have that growing in the shade there in one of our the middle path there of the gardens. And cardinal flower. This we actually got from the Friends of Acadia plant sale, one of their first plant sales, I think, maybe 2013, 14, somewhere in there. So it does really well for us in the gardens, but I don't know if anyone wants to comment now or later, but we have this variation in ours where some of them go quite white.
Hmm.
So this one is actually not native to Nova Scotia, as far as I know, but very close. And this one as well, the purple flowering raspberry, um, is not native to Nova Scotia, but it's kind of a fun one. That's I think native to New Brunswick, if not definitely to Ontario. So I just want to throw this in as well. I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with Vazcan, but it's sort of has a visual, it has a like a range map if we look up plants, and it has a really good, if you're ever unsure of the botanical name of something or the vernacular um, names that it could have, the website Vazcan is really good. Um, the one on the right is the one for the US, and it's not quite as accurate, I find. But I find they're pretty good user-friendly websites. And then I also really like to look up things on the ACCDC ranking lists. And hopefully everyone here knows about that. Uh, but also sometimes if you're looking for a little bit more information, that old publication, Nova Scotia Plants, which is, I guess, becoming more and more outdated. But anyways, it's a really good one, and it's available online now. So, why grow native plants? Um, the this is an aerial view of the Victorian garden at the gardens, and it's pretty sim it's very simple for the brain, right? So you it's very labor intensive and water intensive, but it's also, you plant things and then you rip them out after. And a lot of our gardeners who've been there at the gardens for a long time really like this idea because it's kind of easy to know what's planted and what's a weed and that sort of thing. Um, but oh wait, so when when we first put in the native plant garden, um, one of the gardeners was sort of saying to me, he's like, I just don't understand. Like, why would you not just go out into the woods if you wanted to see some of these plants? And fair point. But I sort of got very defensive and said, well, this is the woods aren't not necessarily accessible to everyone, and not every plant in the woods has a name tag under it either. And I think one of the reasons that people might want to plant native plants is so that they can learn about plants in the wild. Maybe it's something at the middle one there, the scutellaria. I think that's that Laterifolia flora. If someone wants to correct me, they can. Um, but it was one that we got from the Friends of Acadia native plant sale, and then I didn't really know much about it, but then afterwards I started seeing it everywhere when I was out walking around. So it's sort of fun to grow something in a garden situation and then sort of learn about it and then see it in the wild. Um, I put witch hazel in there because I think at one of the other presentations, someone was sort of talking about how witch hazels bloom in what time of year witch hazels bloom, and the 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 native witch hazel, of course, blooms late summer, early fall, into the beginning of winter, whereas the a lot of the non-native hybrids, the garden ornamentals, they bloom in February, March, some in January. But because most of those are hybrids or they're cultivars of either of ones that are not native to Nova Scotia. Um, and then I put the American elm in there because the Annapolis Royal has an elm tree protection sort of program where we've been injecting our elm trees both in the gardens and in town, and some private folks do that as well. And there are still elms that exist in the wild, but fewer and fewer of them. And I know a lot of people would be hard pressed to see elms in the woods. So I think just in a in the situation of a botanical gardens, maybe not in your own backyard, but it's important to have some of these plants, or even to plant some of the cultivars that are maybe Dutch elm resistant, um, Dutch elm disease resistant, so that we can show people what these trees look like. Another reason you might want to grow native plants is and these are just ideas off from my experience. So another reason is you might want to grow plants that, these are sort of some of the reasons people mention when they talk about why you would say grow something in place of boxwood, right? So boxwoods, which are typically your trained shrubs, have been widely used in ornamental horticulture. So of course they've got every kind of disease and pest. Whereas, if you take a native plant that's already sort of adapted to your area, the Harriet Irving Botanical Gardens, of course, at Acadia does a wonderful job of this. They've got Ilex glabra, Ilex verticillata, and bayberry that they use for their hedging in place of things like privet and boxwoods. These are some other reasons that people sometimes list for why you would want to use native plants. I say change in maintenance regime because I know the when people talk about using native plants, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's less maintenance or low maintenance. It, of course, can be over time. If you plant a bunch of ferns, that could be less maintenance than, let's say, mowing a lawn. But of course, it's just going to depend on your situation. Um, Providing seasonal interest is a big one for me because in the historic gardens, a lot of our sort of more formal gardens start to look pretty straggly by late in the season, and that's really when the native plant garden starts to is at its peak, I guess, with the colors, and it's more of an attraction in the later in the season, which is sort of nice. Um, and that's leatherleaf there on the right, which is sort of neat to see because I never noticed that it actually looks like that at that time of the year until I saw it in a garden situation. Throw this in as I'm always, talking about how, seeing the world through a different lens. So, uh, sort of some of the previous ways of looking at gardening was if you saw something like the first two pictures there, if you saw, fungus or mold or gall, those were kind of scary, bad things. But sometimes we sort of stretch our mind a little bit when we start using native plants and we start, thinking about how, if I saw that gall in the rose garden, I would be, not very happy. But when I see it at the base of a plant in the native plant garden, I go, oh, this is really interesting and exciting. I've never seen, rose root gall on Rosa virginiana before. So, anyways, it's just a thought to put it out there. And the liverwort on the right, something that volunteered, and I thought, well, why don't we put a label on it and say and teach people about what liverworts are? Um, and then, of course, the big one is why would you plant native plants? Well, to support biodiversity, right? So this bridge to wildlands, and also especially to reduce the spread of non-native invasive plants. Um, the nest there in the middle is in the middle of some red osier dogwood, and it's actually really protected because it's also in the midst of a whole bunch of roses, and so uh, you can create sort of those really interesting places for critters and insects when you sort of let things go a little bit wild. Um, the 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 milkweed on the right is a little bit controversial because there's this idea too, if you use milkweed in, like, say, your backyard garden and then you attract the monarchs, you also are sort of attracting a lot of, you're sort of concentrating that population and attracting a lot of predators, um, or disease. But I guess the idea is that if everyone were to plant milkweed in their backyards, there would be, food for the monarchs, and we wouldn't be concentrating a population in just one person's backyard. And so talking about invasive plants, this is the site of a former nursery nearby the nearby the gardens, not too far from it, where wisteria is growing up through the little wooded area there. And it's sort of neat to see that there's Chinese chestnuts growing in there and there's tulip trees. Um, but I guess my point is that we don't really know what plants are going to be invasive. I'm sure the nursery who was there at the time had no idea that this was going to be uh, that what wisteria was going to do and take over. But it's true of things that we plant today too, that we don't know what their effect is going to be, how much, birds are going to spread their seeds around local. And so especially if your property backs up onto a woodlot or something, I think growing native plants is a good idea because there's not even the potential, let's say, for introducing some of these invasive plants. There's one of our local nurseries says that everyone should have a license if they want to grow wisteria. And I just wanted to mention too um, that public gardens in North America and probably elsewhere as well are obviously aware of the issue with with invasive plants, um, and there is actually sort of an organization now where through the American Public Gardens Association, there's a number of gardens in Canada and the US who are uh, tracking some of their plants and for potential to become invasive. One of the ones they recently added to the list is tree lilacs, and so we haven't seen that, of course, here, but maybe in some of the southern U.S. states, that's becoming a problem. So it is good to know that at least that some of this information is being recorded now. And then just to put it into a little bit more context, um, there's always this lag time, right? So we started to realize that invasive species were an issue. That was first published in literature in 1958, and then today we know better and can do better, right? But there's of course that lag time. And then just to complicate the matter a little further, uh, if some of you are aware of Phragmites, Phragmites australis, subspecies australis, which is the European reed. That's one that I think Annapolis Royal is sort of ground zero for Phragmites. The first sort of known record for it in the early 1900s was from Annapolis Royal. Um, and so locally we call it elephant grass. Um, but there's a story on that too. I'm not sure if you want to hear that later, but it's the plant that we were using to thatch the Acadian cottage, which wouldn't have been historically accurate, but it was widely available around the gardens when they did the thatching. And so definitely don't recommend planting it, of course. But this is just a case where uh, wildlife have sort of adapted to using the Phragmites. So in the foreground, you see the close up of what's actually um, uh, well, basically mason bees have started using the Phragmites, and then the woodpeckers have come and have been attracted by the mason bee larva. So it became a sort of its own ecosystem. And so sometimes with invasive species, you do have sort of these interesting things happening, but just a fun story. And then we started collecting a list last year of all the different bird species that we're seeing in the gardens. And are these bird species here because we have native plants or not necessarily, but I'm sure that some of that helps. Um, and there's one that's not on there, but we have heard peewees in the gardens as well, the wood peewee. So that's just another picture there of the Phragmites. And us trying to control it, basically keep it at the fence line. The last reason I would say for why a person might want to use want to use native plants is to connect with the place where you live, right? So those cultural stories and natural history and the plant communities. Um, the middle picture there is ironwood, um, and I wanted to share a little story about that one. When we have school groups who come in the garden, sometimes I tell a story about how one of our local artists, Mi'kmaq artists, Lauren Julian, he was invited to paint hockey sticks or a hockey stick for the World Juniors for to give out as a prize, and they or for the most valuable player or something. And when he was doing research about this, he found out that his great grandfather used to carve hockey sticks for Eaton's. And so he also found out that not only was a lot of times we hear about ash being used, but actually the ironwood he was saying was one of the sort of original hockey sticks. And they always looked for, if you see that branch, how it's sort of curved, because the original ones were done all in one piece. So they were looking for those sort of curved branches. And of course, the ironwood is a really tough wood. So that's just a story I like to share. So because it also sort of puts that in context of how that plant was used here. And then cranberries. Um, we we always tell a story about how we have 4 centuries of apples at the gardens, and I like to add in that we also have um, well, you might have heard people talk about apples as the French cranberry. Uh, and so I like to think of the cranberry as the original apple here in Nova Scotia. Oh, and for anyone who's really into botanical names, the bearberry, um, it's a fun one because often you'll see this in sometimes cultivar names for rhododendrons. The plant breeder will do something funny like this, but in this case, with the bearberry, in botany, you're not supposed to use toponyms. So names like where the genus is the same as the species, or the second part of the species name. So you can't say Arctostaphylos, Arctostaphylos. But in this case, to say, they got around this by using a Greek word and a Latin word. So Arctostaphylos is the Greek, meaning bear grapes, and uva ursi is the Latin for bear grapes. So just a fun little thing in there. Oh, and cranberries too. Someone told me recently, this may be a story, I don't know, but that the word cranberry comes from the shape of the head of the flower to looking like a crane. Okay, so which native plants? Yes, if you were to plant some native plants, what would you choose? Just gonna check my time here. Ooh, okay, so um, in uh, public gardens right now, there's a lot of discussion about this idea of the straight species, right? Because for some years we talked about, cultivars and straight species, and this idea that the straight species was sort of like this better thing, and a cultivar was sort of adulterated. Um, but the idea of a straight species is a little bit misguided because um, it sort of assumes this idea that every clethra alnifolia is the same everywhere in its range, right? And so uh, just sort of wanted to throw it out there that this language maybe has some issues, because the same way that if I were to plant a tomato in my garden and you were to plant the same variety of tomato in your garden, and we grew that same tomato and saved seeds every year for 40 years, yes, we're growing the same variety, but it's been adapted to the climate in which it's grown, right? So the neat thing about a cultivar is that um, it's it gives you a little more information about that plant. Whereas the quote unquote straight species, it doesn't tell you where exactly that plant was from. So that's our job as gardeners to sort of record that information. And a lot of botanical gardens are starting to do a lot better job of that, keeping their records of, where that seed came from. And that's just an example of we have several different plethora cultivars in the gardens. And I've tried to sort of put them side by side and figure out the difference, the differences. Um, but if anyone's really into that and wants to stop by the gardens and do a deep dive, I welcome that. Right. So again, that clonal or provenance is sort of unknown when you just talk about the straight species. And the other issue sometimes with some of the garden straight species, the native plants you might see in nurseries, is that sometimes they're misidentified. So one that we have in the gardens, which we thought was Labrador violet, turns out when you actually start looking at it, oh, it's actually this one that they sell in nurseries. As Labrador violet, but it's not actually Labrador violet. So if you care about those sort of things, then you want to be really careful. But it's still a great plant. But it is not the native one. It's a European version. And then this is another interesting one. Um, because it was, I think, sold in the nurseries for a little bit of time, but I'm not 100% sure where it came from. Because it is an Atlantic coastal plain flora plant that's sort of listed as, I think, threatened, if not endangered. But the picture on the right is that Coreopsis growing in the historic gardens, and the picture on the left is the Coreopsis rosea growing on the waterfront in Digby. So where these plants come from, I don't know, but they're a great plant. And there's also other versions of Coreopsis that are not native to Nova Scotia. Actually, there's one that is Coreopsis lant. I think the lanceolata is also native. Oh, there you go. There's endangered. Yeah, so how it's available in the nurseries, I'm not sure. And we also have, this was a mystery that I wanted to throw out there in case anyone wants to solve it for me. We have one lonely shrub of Eastern Baccharis, groundsel, which is the other name for it, growing at the gardens, and I'm not sure where that came from, even though we do keep quite good records about where things came from. Some of the early plants had some question marks beside them. So it is not doing terribly well where it is, but anyways, that's not necessarily one you're going to plant in your garden. I just wanted to mention that. Okay, right. So I'm not sure how long I'm supposed to talk for, but
You want?
okay. So I wanted to showcase a little bit of the native plant garden that I was mentioning earlier at the gardens. We started calling it the nature garden in the beginning, and then realized that that was not hugely descriptive. So it's on the lower path, and it's sort of developed over the last 15-ish years. And the concept was, uh, ideally this idea of low maintenance. So over time, it's going to be a different kind of maintenance regime than, say, the Victorian garden would be. Um, and yeah, this I actually just found this note on one of the old concept plans for the garden, and historic food production was also on there. But basically this transition period, so you're moving through the gardens into sort of a more wild area. Um, so the asters and goldenrod were not planted, but it was a big thing in the beginning to try and figure out what things you should let grow and what things you should weed out, to sort of direct the garden in a certain way. And for some of the gardeners, it was really difficult because, if you see some goldenrod or if you see some asters, in some of the other gardens in the gardens, then it's a weed there. But in the native plant garden, it's might be something you leave, but it also depends on where it's growing in the native plant garden. So it's uh it's a little bit different kind of gardening than some people might be used to. And on the right there is Ilex verticillata. It's one of the cultivars that's grown for having a lot heavier berry production. Yeah, so the milkweed really took off for a while, but now it's sort of fizzling out because, as we've noticed, the native plant garden it changes and adapts, right? It's that idea again that it's a dynamic plant system. On the left-hand side, it's the lacewing and the ladybug and some aphids all side by side. I thought that was sort of a neat picture to include. Okay, my favorite shrub. Um, I've grown this from seed, so can you. It's this button bush. I think it's starting to become more available in nurseries, but I think it's really, really an awesome one. It's just these pictures don't even do it justice, but it's just a really fun one, and it's of course one that's native only to Nova Scotia. And this one is my other one that I want to champion. It's had a million name changes in the last little while, so most people know it as a potentilla, but it's a great ground cover. And it's growing in full sun where we have it, but it'll fill in really lovely. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, but wine leaf is another name for it, because of the color of the leaf. And not ones you might want in your home garden, but we have a huge section that's been sort of taken over by Rosa virginiana, one of our native roses. And it's on the right-hand side, you can see it growing with the Carex nigra. Um, and it's an amazing one that's salt tolerant. And it's kind of uh, it's really aggressive. So I've actually dug it out with the backhoe before, but it's just an excellent. I showed that nest earlier on when the red osier dogwood, and it was growing in amongst the Rosa virginiana, so having that protection for the birds was so really excellent sort of nest habitat. And it'll grow anywhere except in really waterlogged situations. And I think the carex is often used in wetland restoration work. And this is another one that I love, but it's very thuggish and aggressive. One of our gardeners who'd been at the gardens for decades brought it in, and now all of the gardeners refer to it as, instead of anemone, they refer to it as my enemy because it spreads quite a bit. But if that's something you like, then search it out. I'm not sure how widely available this is. One of our gardeners brought it from her backyard, but it's actually listed, um, I think, an S2 now. Okay, so back in April of 2020, something happened to our native plant garden, and it wasn't COVID. So we had high tide, a storm surge, spring high tide that came and flooded over the lower half of the basically up to the middle of the lower path. And so that little sliver of land that you see is not the dikes. So there is a dike that sort of protects the lower end of the gardens, and it's a very small dike. It was just built on sort of remnants of the old Acadian dikes. Um, but it was also meant to be a sort of an educational piece, for tourists and for people to see like what that diking looks like, because potentially this was the sort of the footprint of the first dikes in Canada, maybe North America. So that sliver of land that you see is not the dike; it's the fence, the deer fence at the bottom of the gardens. So it actually took 3 days for all of that salt water to drain out. And what we found is everything that was left in the gardens was very salt tolerant, and everything we lost was not. So it did change the gardens quite a bit. You see little dwarf hemlocks in that photo. And this next photo on the right, you can see the dwarf hemlocks are still sort of hanging on. Um, but eventually they did go, and we did lose a lot of plant material. But there are some things like the potentilla beside the dwarf hemlocks on the right. The potentilla there is that ground cover, and it did sort of get a little more sparse, but then so it didn't love the salt water, but it did recover eventually and completely fill back in. Um, oh, there it is again there, with the panicum. And the other thing that happened, which was really interesting, was that we had planted New England asters in the native plant garden. Didn't realize that they weren't native to Nova Scotia. But after the flooding happened, the New England asters disappeared and the New York asters appeared. I'm sorry, I haven't put the names on those slides. And someone else can fill in the botanical name if you have questions about that. And then on the left there is sweetgrass, and the sweetgrass loved the coastal flood, the flooding, the tidal flooding. Um, so it did really, really well. And I think it's one of those plants that is sort of prone to this coastal squeeze now because it's often found growing near a lot of dikes. But the one we had, the sweetgrass we have was actually planted in our native plant garden. But it really did flourish after the salt flooding, but it did not flourish last year during the drought. And these are a couple of plants that we did lose, so not salt tolerant. Um, so the wintergreen, not sure why we planted some down there, but it was really great. It's a really fun one because people like to eat it. Um, and it had these, because it was growing in this full sun situation, and it had these giant berries on it, and it was quite good. But yeah, not salt tolerant. And sweet fern did not survive that flooding, but I've seen it at the local arts council has it growing in front of their building at Arts Place, and it as an ornamental shrub, and it's quite lovely. So often people want to know, how do I pick a native plant? And I like to make things really simple. So will it be happy here? And does it make you happy? Basically. So, um, if you're looking for advice, that's all I have for you. And basically to try something because you don't know if it's gonna work in your situation or not. So just a listing of some of the grasses and sedges, and I can go back to this if people have questions as well. Um, uh, so here's some deciduous shrubs. And some of them I've mentioned already. These are just ones that we have at the gardens. You can see the number of different cultivars of Ilex verticillata. Um, and evergreen shrubs. I love Andromeda. It's available now even at like Home Hardware sells it. So um deciduous trees. So I think we pretty much have every deciduous tree. I put black ash on there, Wisco or Fraxus nigra, but I put it with a question mark because we have some ash trees that were given to us as black ash, but I don't think that they are. But um, and then perennials, herbaceous perennials. Not everything we have is on this list, but a number of the things that we've planted are the like Lycopus or the water horehound is a good one if you have a really wet property. Oh, and the Adriatina altissima, that is one we got from the native plant sale at Acadia also. And I think it's great. I've never knew much about it, but I don't know if anyone's seen it in the wild before. But it grows really well in our pine forest. It's starting to spread now too. Wildflower in your backyard. Right. So these are not at the gardens. We do actually do have some ground nut at the gardens, but this picture was taken on Highway 8, sort of off of Highway 8 towards Keji. But I think these would be great. Our ground nut does not flower like this, but maybe one day it will, or if we move it to a different place, maybe. Um, but I think these would be great in a garden situation, if you're able to source them without digging them up from the wild necessarily. And I don't know, I just thought these ones would be too. Um, Again, I'm not sure propagation of them, but we do have some Lysimachia growing at the gardens. The swamp candles, not the Lysimachia maritima. But these are both ones that grow very close to the garden, so I don't see why they couldn't grow in the gardens as well. And we did have Rhodora, but I think it's gone since the flooding. But um, we do have an extensive rhododendron collection, so it would be a shame not to sort of talk about the native rhododendrons as well. Um, and fireweed, we used to have a lot of fireweed in the gardens, but it's sort of fizzled out. But I think these two would be great additions too. So these are not, yeah, these are just sort of inspiration from from plants around the area. Um, I don't know, does anyone have wild leek growing in their gardens?
I haven't been able to get it. I've tried, but it hasn't stayed.
Hasn't stayed yet. I
Uh,
used to when I was in Ontario. We did a plant rescue, and so a lot of us left with with wild leeks too that were in excess. But yeah, I haven't. We don't have it at the gardens right now. I don't know. I threw this one in because I just thought I wondered what this would look like in an ornamental situation. That's you might recognize the fellow there on the right. But that was on one of the field trips last year. At Smiley's or just yeah, that was at Smiley's. Um, but
I was kind of surprised to see that Dutchman's breeches was a wild plant. I have a pink one.
what were you surprised to see, Carol?
The Dutchman's breeches.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. That's I was going to mention that. So there are a number of different of Dicentra cultivars, of course, um, that are available ornamentally. I've never seen this one as a plant you can buy in the nurseries, but that's actually growing in Digby County, so not too far away.
yeah, I've
So
seen
the
it.
pink one would be a cultivar, would it?
Yeah, I think it's a different species though.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, and then I guess I just wanted to mention that um, we have these we have these gardens where we're trying to plant native plants, but we're never going to do it like nature does it, right? So so sometimes I like to go out and just kind of get inspiration from things in the things in the wild, but um yeah, I mean it's hard to get a fern to grow on a rock in a garden situation. But in nature, you're never going to see a rock that doesn't have, lichens and mosses and ferns and other things growing out of them. This is one that was suggested to me that we should grow at the gardens because it's part of that sort of plant community that we don't sort of have enough education about. So the sand barrens. This is a sand barren plant. So maybe we'll look to try and have a sort of a sand barren demonstration or educational piece in the future. But that's just a thought. And again, that's the crowberry growing on a rock. So it's hard to plant that in a garden, but you can be inspired by what you see in nature. I'm not sure. I originally when I was going to do a talk, it was going to be for the members slideshow. And I was just going to do 5 minutes on some of the plants I saw down at Pudalaknagotic Wilderness area near Shingle Lake. But I couldn't make it to that talk. So Bob had suggested I do a bigger talk, and these are some photos that were taken out of that. But again, just that idea that, in your garden, it's hard to get plants to do things like this, but maybe sometimes you plant and then you let the plants sort of tell you what they want to do. Um, and oh, I just threw this in just because uh, never gonna have this in the in the garden situation, but um, this is of course the Atlantic Coastal Plain flora, the golden crest, endangered plant. Um, but I'm probably off topic now, so I will stop at some point. But I just wanted to show these last few slides of this plant I went to see it in July, and it was the first time I'd ever seen golden crest. But I've been told that it did really, really well last year during the drought because I think some of our coastal plain flora do well here. Um, because when they don't have as much competition. And I think that's maybe why it was blooming so well and really putting on a show. So again, that's down near at Pudalaknagotic Wilderness area. Okay, yeah, that's all I have. So people can ask questions or tell me if I've said anything terribly wrong.
That was great. One of the things I find with the native plants I grow, I love the fact that I can see them develop over the course of the year. So when I'm out in the wild where I wouldn't be able to recognize a lot of these plants normally because I'm familiar with them and how they grow, I recognize, a type of goldenrod or whatever at a much earlier stage than before it's flowering or anything. So it's really helped me identify nature a lot by being able to just study these plants as they grow through a whole season.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really, really awesome.
Can I ask a question or comment?
Please, David. Yeah.
Yeah. Just on you mentioned about the plants that don't quite belong in Nova Scotia, which Bill Friedman used to always call extra limital species. And I think one really big value of that is that, the horticultural situation is a good place to test them for potential use and assisted migration in the future. So I think we should be growing a lot more of them, quite honestly.
Yeah, that's a good
These
point.
extra limitals. Yeah.
There's a lot of conversations with other botanical gardens or display gardens about that idea of like what will grow well in the future here.
Yeah.
Right? So sort of this idea of maybe growing one zone different, like your neighboring plants, to try and incorporate those because maybe in some years those will be the ones that will do better than some of the ones that we have native to the province.
Yeah. But just to comment on the broom crowberry, sweetie, sorry. I'm just talking for a second. Sorry, I got two things going on here. The broom crowberry, I've sort of experimented quite a bit. And I'm able to grow it if you take shallow trays and puncture them so they drain quickly.
Mhm.
Because where I'm used to seeing them is not on the sand barrens, but on the rock barrens. And they'll grow basically on, very shallow rock. And I find that makes good habitat for them. You just have really rapid drainage and then just very thin layer of soil and you can grow them.
Right.
And
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly. And I guess that picture actually, I guess, would have been the rock barrens and not sand barrens that I showed. So yeah, good point.
but
Thank you.
it does grow very thickly in the sand barrens and Annapolis, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed it. So many different venues. They're really interesting.
Jeremy, you have a question?
Thanks, Ashley. That was great. It's really enjoyable, especially given what's going on outside right now. It's nice to think about growing plants in the spring and summer. Um, but a couple questions. The related to that idea of extra liminal plants. Um, a bunch of native plant gardeners are now using the Wabanagi forest region as sort of their, what counts as native, and that includes, a good chunk of New Brunswick, some of Maine, east, like parts of Quebec, that kind of thing too. So I guess my first question is that concept, are people using that concept in your spaces?
I would like that to be the case. Yeah. I think when the native plant garden was designed, the idea was it was only going to be Nova Scotia, right? But yeah, I don't see why not, especially in the area that's right now called the Pine Forest at the gardens. That would be a great place to have, yeah, all of the Wabanaki area included.
I think another thing is that like the native plant, like it's not a static thing. Like it's
No.
migration, right? Like ever since glaciation, plants have been migrating into different areas and filling in gaps and things. And it's still happening. Like I know, I remember reading once that the white pine has been migrating from the Carolinas through North America. It's around Minnesota now is where the edge of the migration is, and it's still continuing. And so all these, and with Nova Scotia having such a limited land connection with the rest of North America, a lot of these New Brunswick plants are slowly making their way across the isthmus. And, you'll see a number that you can just find in that particular part of Nova Scotia, and then they're slowly propagating. So, I mean, it's, when you say, is this native to Nova Scotia? Well, that may be for today, but tomorrow, maybe there's another native plant, it's.
Sure. And I mean, something that's, native to one part of Nova Scotia could be completely different than in Cape Breton or,
Yeah,
so even
true,
just,
yeah.
yeah, it's sort of funny to think about
Yeah,
those
nature
boundaries.
didn't really draw a border along the, our political line.
Exactly. Exactly.
Ashley, did you ever grow the Pearly Everlasting in Annapolis? Did you propagate it or was it transplanted? I'm just curious. Why I
I'm not
struggle
sure
with trying to
because
grow that one.
um it's it we okay, so we do have it planted now in the native plant garden. Um but we got that from the courtyard where it was growing between the paving, between the flagstone there. I don't know where it came from. So there's a lot of things we have really good records for, but there's a few that just sort of it's a bit of a question mark. So I don't know, yeah.
I have something I'd like to ask.
Yep.
I'm involved with the rock garden at Dalhousie Agricultural College, and as a Society Nova Scotia Rock Garden Club, we put in a woodland garden probably 14 years ago, and over time, between the shade and the deer, all of the plants that were in there have basically been eaten or trampled or whatever. So we are looking at putting for a proposal forward to try to bring the woodland garden back into some kind of shape with things that are perhaps not quite as tempting to deer. Thinking probably a fernery might be a good idea because deer in different areas will eat all kinds of different things. They don't eat it in my garden, but they'll eat it in somebody else's garden. So I'm looking for lists of plants that might be a little bit more deer resistant than the things that were in there. And some of those plants were vacciniums and some of the coastal barren plants. And the deer just loved those and just ate them to the ground. So what we're looking for is some ideas on what people in their own gardens have found of native plants, preferably that might be not quite as attractive. And as I said, I'm thinking that the ferns might be something, and some of the low-growing things like the Michella and some of those little creeping things that might be a little bit more resistant than the shrubby things that they are just right at head height.
Yeah, I mean, we have a deer fence around the
Yes,
garden.
yes, there isn't a deer fence at that Val.
No, ours was put in by volunteers 20 years ago, and I'm surprised the gardens lasted that long without one. But Yeah, I mean, talk about invasive species, right? But yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, maybe I don't know if anyone else in the room has ideas too, but I don't know. Clematis virginiana for some reason just came to my head too. I mean, it's not usually beautiful but it's sort of a neat one. And it grows really well from seed if you wanted to propagate a whole bunch of it.
So
Um,
put it on the list.
but
But
yeah, I think you already sort of have some ideas, it sounds like.
well, the garden was put in back in the early 20s, 2020. Oh, sorry, not 2020, 20, yeah, 2020, 2003, I think, is when it was first developed. And over time, it's expanded. And there are rock garden sections, with that the deer don't seem to be quite as thrilled about. But this little woodland section, the deer, I think they bunk down there over the winter. They just sit and eat whatever's within reach. But as I said, I'm thinking whatever's growing low to the ground, perhaps, and ferns might be a way to go, and preferably native plants. So
Mhm.
Do you think a deer fence would be out of the question for
yes,
now?
Dal wouldn't have anything to do with a deer fence because the garden is not their top priority, unfortunately. They have friends of the garden and they do all the work and basically a lot of the fundraising. So and the garden is big enough and broken up enough that a deer fencing would really not be possible. And then there's
Mhm.
facilities that won't have anything that gets in the way of where they're running pipes and underground wires and things like that.
Because those deer in Truro, they eat everything.
It's almost as bad as St. Andrews, New Brunswick.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, maybe if I think of some things, I'll send you maybe a little note or something.
I found that in my woodland, I've got a deer problem too. Sedges work as well as grasses.
Mm.
So, are there any native sedges?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, Friends of Acadia had the oak sedge at the plant sale last year. And I think there's a couple different ones that I hadn't heard of being available in nurseries that they had this. They have their on their website. They have the availability of stuff up already. What they're going to be offering this year. And there is a Carex on there for sure.
I think you need to clarify which plant sale you're talking about.
Oh, sorry, the one that happens at Acadia University
Oh,
in
okay.
May.
Okay. 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 Thank you. I'm with Friends of Acadia in Maine.
Oh,
We're not that organized. We don't have a list of our plants up.
well, I don't think there's going to be any more questions. So that was great. I really enjoyed it. And I'm dying to go out to see the gardens. I haven't been there in a long time. And you've just motivated me to head out to Annapolis Royal and see the gardens and see what you've been up to.
Right.
Yeah, me too. I haven't been there for years, which is shameful, but we used to go through there when we're on our way to Briar Island. And then once the highway went in, we just, you bypass it and you don't want to take time. You just need to get the ferry. So I would love to come again. That would be wonderful. And it must be an ideal spot because of the having a water component. I mean, a shoreline with cattails and other aquatic things, and a duck. What do they call it? Uh, anyway, I forget what it's called.
Marshland there.
Yeah, right. So the two go nicely together.
Yep, you can
What
come identify all of our mosses, Anne.
would you say, would you say it's a bit of a microclimate there where it
Oh,
is?
oh yeah, definitely. Yes, for sure. And the gardens itself, and then within the gardens as well. Um, there's definitely some microclimates. Yeah, it's well positioned. And it's a hillside, right? So it goes down towards the gardens on a hill. Um, a nice slope, so that's good too. And it's a naturally very wet area.
Mhm.
So we were really lucky last year during the drought that we Yeah, it wasn't as bad for us as it could have been, basically.
But there's a reeds and so on and water for Ducks Unlimited. Is that still part of the?
That's
It's
across
probably
the
not.
No,
Hmm?
the Ducks Unlimited, I think, still owns some of the property along the in the Dykelands, but or in the marshland, but they don't do anything with that anymore. But across the
Oh,
street there is also the French Basin Trail that goes around a duck pond there. And that's actually a really great place for bird watchers because everything's really concentrated. So you might see more there than you would on a day at Keji for in terms of waterfowl. And it's actually really fun because I showed the listing of birds that we have at the gardens, and I'm not a bird person at all, but trying to be. But the we have willets that hang out on the Dykelands, and for many years it was they would parade basically when they're young ones. When they had their babies, they would parade them through the gardens, up the gardens, across the road, over to the duck pond across the street. It was quite a show. So
That's cool.
I would be, well, I have a husband who does birding seriously. And so the two of us should come and I could have a look at what mosses are there. I wasn't doing mosses way back when, so that tells you how long ago it was I was in the gardens. No, it'd be interesting to see what's there bird wise. It's an ideal property. I mean, ideal situation for birds, for sheltering, for nesting, for aquatic birds, and it's always, I can remember it always being interesting because we used to stop with the kids and wander through the gardens and bird watch and tag along with Eric. It's a treasure. It's a little treasure in the middle of the province.
So if we visit the garden, are we likely to run into you there?
Who, me?
Ashley, you do.
yeah, I try to hide behind the bushes, but definitely
Yeah.
ask me if you come right now, bring your snowshoes. But
Yes, tonight I had to, I didn't think ahead. And I don't have very far to go from the house to my lab. But at about it'd be 7, 7:15, I decided to go out and bring my laptop into the house. And I had to shovel my way across from the house to the lab because otherwise the snow was up to my knees. It had drifted. So it was a bit of an exercise for me just before bedtime. Anyway, this has been a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it, and I've been spending far too much time just walking, especially with my daughter's dog, getting very fit, but not looking at plants or mosses or liverworts or anything. And I'm really anxious to be able to see the ground again so that I can start doing some things that are important to me. Anyway,
yeah,
it was a great talk.
we used to say that the lichens were, something you could see all year round, but when there's so much snow in the trees, it's hard to see those too.
Right now they're plastered
That's
with
right.
snow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, certainly well, in between the previous storms and now, I have a couple of big spruce trees that are that have squirrel, what do they call them? There's
Drays?
sorry?
A squirrel nest, a dray?
Yeah. Well, they have squirrel middens be down on the floor, on the floor of the grass. And there are piles of spruce cones. And we know that that's red spruce. It's interesting. I didn't know that until I went out with Minga O'Brien one time on a field trip. And she pointed out the fact that when you find middens, you know you have red spruce, which is interesting. But anyway, at the base of these two big old trees that were here when we moved here in 1991, I think, and they're mosses at the bottom. They're just right at the bottom. It's shaded there. There's a stone walk, and on either side there are mosses, and I think it's hypnum, one of the hypnums. But you can see them because they don't get snowed in, but now they are snowed in. And they're perfectly happy being there. Anyway, so are the other plants. And the frustrating thing about mosses is really not a problem for deer because they don't eat mosses, but they certainly eat everything else. And so I don't have a flower garden because we have 11 deer that come traipsing through our property, and they eat everything on the way, even things that they're not supposed to be interested in.
Yeah, we have very uneducated deer. They don't seem to know what
They are. Anyway.
Okay, well, I think we're gonna wrap things up. The next meeting in late March, we're gonna have Ginny and Lisa Proul give us a talk. For those of you who know her or those of you who don't, I consider Ginny in particular, but both of them really, to be provincial treasures. They've been very active in the nature movement, particularly botany. Ginny goes right back to she was working with and is familiar with some of the early botanists in the province, and it's just full of great stories and things. So I'm looking forward to that talk a lot. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So I think that's it for tonight. Anything else anybody has to say before we sign off?
Good night and happy shoveling.
Yeah, really.
Happy shoveling, yes.
That's right.
Maybe our paths cross. We'll
Morning.
cross
Yeah.
again, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks. It was really good. Thanks so much.
Yes.
Thanks for organizing.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Night.